Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Munatira Vanachariya Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivara Dari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajakacharyasta Sata Shishi Mad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Ko Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopagopna Sham Kun Radha Kun Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Navadip Dham Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaura Premananda Hari Hari Bol All glories to the assembled devotees All glories to the assembled devotees Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shishi Guru and Gauranga and His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada Ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Vasudevaya. So we're reading from the 10th canto, and we're in chapter 21, the Gopis glorify Krishna's flute, and we're on text 12. And so, Krishnam Niriksha Vanitotsava Rupa Shilam Shutva Cha Tatkwanita Venu Vivikta Gitam Devyo Vimanha Gatayaha Smara Nuna Sara Brashat Parasuna Kabara Mumuhur Vinivyaha Krishnam Niriksha Vanitotsavarupa Shilang Shutva Chatatkwanita Venu Vivikta Gitam Devyo Vimana Gataya Smaranuna Sara Brashyat Prasuna Kabara Mumuhur Vinivyaha Krishnam Niriksha Vanitotsavarupa Shilam Sutva Chatatkwa Nitat Venu Viviktav Gitam Devyo Vimana Gataya Smaranuna Sara Brashyat Prasuna Kabara Mumuhu Vinivyaha Krishnam, Lord Krishna, Niriksha, observing, Vanita, for all women, Utsava, a festival, Rupa, whose beauty, Shilam, and character, Shrutva, hearing, Cha, and, Tat, by him, Kwanita, vibrated, Venu, of the flute, Vivikta, clear, Gitam, song, Devyaha, the wives of the demigods, Vimanagatayaha, traveling in their airplanes, Smara, by Cupid, Nuna, agitated, Saraha, their hearts, Brashat, slipping, Prasuna, Kabaraha, the flowers tied in their hair, Mumuhuhu, they became bewildered, Vinivyaha, their belts loosening. So translation, Krishna's beauty and character create a festival for all women. Indeed, when the demigods' wives flying in airplanes with their husbands caught sight of him and hear his resonant flute song, their hearts are shaken by Cupid, and they become so bewildered that the flowers fall out of their hair and their belts loosen. So we can repeat. Krishna's beauty and character create a festival for all women. Indeed, when the demigods' wives flying in airplanes with their husbands catch sight of him and hear his resonant flute song, their hearts are shaken by Cupid, and they become so bewildered that the flowers fall out of their hair and their belts loosen. So purport by his divine grace, by the disciples of his divine grace, servants. In Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Srila Prabhupada comments, this verse indicates that the transcendental sound of the flute of Krishna extended to all corners of the universe. Also, it is significant that the gopis knew about the different kinds of airplanes flying in the sky. In fact, even while sitting on the laps of their demigod husbands, the demigoddesses became agitated by hearing the sounds of Krishna's flute. Thus the gopis thought that they themselves should not be blamed for their ecstatic conjugal attraction for Krishna, who after all was a cowherd boy from their own village and thus a natural object of their love. If even the demigoddesses became mad after Krishna, how could poor earthly cowherd girls from Krishna's own village avoid having their hearts completely conquered by his loving glances and the sounds of his flute? Krishnam Niriksha. Oh, is there more? So sorry. A little bit slow this morning. The gopis also considered that the demigods, although noting their wives' attraction to Krishna, did not become envious. The demigods are actually very refined in culture and intelligence, and therefore, when flying in their airplanes, they regularly take their wives along to see Krishna. The gopis thought, our husbands, on the other hand, are envious. Therefore, even the inferior deer are better off than we, and the demigoddesses are also very fortunate, whereas we human beings in all intermediate position, whereas we poor human beings in an intermediate position are most unfortunate. Sorry about that. Krishnam niriksha vanitotsavarupa shilong shrutva chatat kwanita venu vivikta gitam devyo vimana gataya smaranuna sara brashyat prasuna kabara mumuhu vinivyaha. Krishna's beauty and character create a festival for all women. Indeed, when the demigods' wives, flying in airplanes with their husbands, catch sight of him and hear his resonant flute song, their hearts are shaken by Cupid, and they become so bewildered that the lotus flowers fall out of their hair and their belts loosen. So, this opened a whole bunch of thought doors for me, and I was thinking how, like the first line of the translation, and please forgive me, Omigyana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. My humble obeisances to my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Bir Krishna Das Goswami, and to His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. The first thing that stood out to me was that Krishna's beauty and character create a festival for all women, and of course, that would seem to be exclusionary, in the fact that it's only for women, and if you have a female body, then somehow you're able to have, this relationship with Krishna. But the fact is that we are all Prakriti to Krishna's Purusha, and I just imagined, as Prabhupada shares in the verse here, that this verse indicates that the transcendental sound of the flute of Krishna extended to all corners of the universe, that this playing of the flute, that this Krishna conscious movement is Krishna's flute spreading throughout this whole material world, and how amazing and beneficial it is, because it attracts the heart of all the living entities, not just those that are in female bodies. And so the other thing too, in thinking about this, of the demigoddesses and the demigods actually taking their wives to see Krishna, and then being attracted by him, by this flute and by Krishna, like Cupid, and loosening, the flowers fall out of their hair and their belts, become loosened, that the demigods weren't envious at all, right? And why is that? Because it's like, Krishna's the center, and we're all going to be attracted to Krishna. And so there's this thing about not having any envy that is so significant and so important, and so required for, in order for us to have a relationship with Krishna. There cannot be any envy. And it's such a very subtle thing, and it happens on many different levels. But one of the things that came to mind that I wanted to share was, because it also mentions that the cowherd girls, the gopis, were talking about the fact that, how fortunate were the demigoddesses, because their husbands, on the other hand, were envious. But we can understand that the husbands of the gopis in the spiritual world are taking on roles, and that everybody in the spiritual world is working towards enlivening Krishna and his relationship with the gopis, especially Srimati Radharani. That's everybody's goal and service is to serve the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna's desire, to have those relationships, those loving relationships. And so they act in a way that is envious, but everybody's working towards that goal of supporting Krishna's desires. So the thing that came to mind as I was reading this was the story of the wives of the Brahmanas in Krishna book. And it brought me, because I love that story. It's really, for me at least, it's extremely enlivening to when I go through this story, because it brings up the fact that the wives of the Brahmanas went to take all this food stuff to Krishna. They left without their permission, but then the Brahmanas had the realization that they had gained and attained the love of Krishna, and they didn't have any envy for them. They were actually feeling repentant at the fact that they had sinned and tried to stop them, and that they didn't have a relationship with like that. So I kind of wanted to share this wonderful, wonderful story, and it's in the Krishna book, the delivering the wives of the Brahmanas who perform sacrifices. And so, I'm sorry? It's 23. And so Krishna and the cowherd boys are out in the pasturing grounds, and then they also go into the forests, and all of a sudden Krishna's, and I'm sure, because Krishna hasn't knows what's going on with all his living entities, and all of a sudden he becomes really hungry. And he and Balaram become really hungry, so he tells the cowherd boys, the brahmanas are performing these sacrifices. You go to the brahmanas and you ask them for food stuff for us, but don't mention me, because I'm kshatriya, and technically they shouldn't give food stuff to Balaram's kshatriya, and I'm Vaishya, so don't mention me, because they're likely not going to want to give to a Vaishya, and they may give to Balaram as a kshatriya. So he sends them. They go to the brahmanas, and the brahmanas are performing their sacrifices, and they go and they make their humble plea to the brahmanas, and because the brahmanas were so, duty-oriented, they totally ignored them, didn't speak to them, didn't say anything to them, probably just looked at them and then just looked the other way, kept doing their sacrifices. And this is the Supreme Personality of, Godhead that they're asking for in the cowherd boys. But they refused to speak to the boys. And so one of the things that Prabhupada says, which I thought was really significant in reference to this and thinking about becoming too ritualistic, is that despite being highly elevated in the knowledge of the Vedic sacrificial rites, all such non-devotee brahmanas, although they think themselves as very highly elevated, are ignorant and foolish persons. All their activities are useless because they do not know the purpose of the Vedas, which we know is to understand and to have a relationship with Krishna. And so, and he goes on to indicate or share that the brahmanas were really just interested in the comforts of the material body and elevation to the higher planets, and therefore they were unable to understand Krishna's position. And so they got really disappointed. They go and they're because obviously the cowherd boys love Krishna and they want him to be fully satisfied. He's hungry. They want him to have something. So they go back and they explain everything to Krishna. And so Krishna says, "Don't worry, go back again." And he also said something else that was significant too that I thought was interesting. Here it is. He convinced them that while one is engaged in collecting or begging, one should not think that he will be successful everywhere. He may be unsuccessful in some places, but that should not be a cause for disappointment. So he asked them to go back. And I thought that was really significant, too, in the context of when we're sharing Krishna consciousness and we're distributing books or we're distributing prasadam or we're trying to distribute the philosophy, that we don't worry about the failures or the results, that we keep trying to give, because at some point that seed will fall on fertile ground and somebody will go, yes, this is exactly what I want when I need it and what I want it. So I thought that was really important to share, that, not to get discouraged, to keep trying, even in your own devotional life. When you come up against different challenges and you don't make it, you don't beat yourself up because you're wasting time not thinking about Krishna and what you can do and the different strategies you can to advance yourself in your spiritual life. But, you take consolation in Krishna's words that you're not going to be successful in every single attempt until we get to that place where we're the pure devotee. So you keep trying and you keep giving your heart no matter what. That's all that matters, that you're following the instructions of the acharyas, for us, Srila Prabhupada, our spiritual master, and we just keep going. And we carry out Krishna's orders. So he sends the boys back to the wives of the brahmanas. And it's kind of funny because when the cowherd boys talk to the wives of the brahmanas, they're so overwhelmed and, kind of blown away, I guess, by the fact that they've come to ask for something about Krishna. And they've been having this long, desire to meet Krishna. And here, all of a sudden, the cowherd boys are coming and asking them, can you please prepare some food stuff for them? They just become mute. And so the cowherd boys are thinking, oh, no, we're back in the same situation again. What are we going to do? We got to get them food stuff, and they're not talking. What's going on? And so, but they start to pick up all the food stuff. They start to get everything prepared, and then they just leave without saying anything and take it to Krishna. And then when they actually get there, Krishna has this conversation, and he's appreciating, obviously, what they've done, but he also, and when they get there, this is also really sweet. When they get there, and this is like, if you can imagine just seeing Krishna for the first time, the Brahmana's wife saw Krishna putting on a garment glittering like gold. He wore a nice garland of forest flowers, banamali, and a peacock feather on his head. He was also painted with the minerals found in Vrindavan, and he looked exactly like a dancing actor on a theatrical stage. They saw him keeping one hand on the shoulder of his friend, and his other hand he was holding a lotus flower. His ears were decorated with lilies. He wore marks of tilak, and he was smiling charmingly. With their eyes, the wives of the Brahmanas saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of whom they had heard so much, who was so dear to them, and in whom their minds were always absorbed. So this is how we get to see Krishna, is by having our hearts and our mind and our words always absorbed in Krishna. And now they got to see him eye to eye, face to face. And Krishna entered within their hearts through their eyes, and they began to embrace Krishna to their heart's content. And so the distress of separation was mitigated immediately. I thought that was really sweet. So, and then the thing that also that was really significant is that Krishna talks about how he could understand their minds, and that they had actually come to him despite all the protests of their relatives, the fathers, husbands, brothers, and the duties that they had of their household affairs, and they came to see him who was their life and soul. So again, this is like echoing and magnifying and, putting in bold what it is that our purpose and what we should do in our devotional life is always putting Krishna and, developing that place in our heart where there's nothing that can deter us from having our relationship with Krishna. Not family, not friends, anything. Nothing can deter us from having that relationship with Krishna. And then, by dedicating our life and our soul, not only will we have that relationship, but those people that are around us will see the change in us. They'll see the shift in our consciousness. They'll see the happiness that we have, and they'll be attracted and pulled by that. And then they get that gift as well. And then they'll ask questions, and then that conversation starts, and then those seeds are planted, and then they fructify. We don't even really have to do anything because of the potency of who Krishna is. He's in every single heart. All we have to do is share, and that awakens everybody's heart. So, and then he welcomed them. But then at the same time, he said that they needed to go back. And they were like, no, you're supposed to be our shelter, and you're supposed to be our shelter. And we're afraid that if we go back, that our husbands and our relatives will, actually discard us. But Krishna says, no, you can actually go back. Everything will be fine. You'll be accepted. And so he goes back, or they go back, and he tells them they won't neglect you. It's fine to return. And so they return home. And then what's interesting are the Brahmins, obviously because Krishna's in the heart, their hearts changed too, and they could see, they had the realization that their wives were, even though forcibly checked, went to see Krishna, they knew that these were exalted devotees and that they had become pure devotees of the Lord. And the Brahmanas began to regret their sinful activity of not serving the Supreme Lord. Can you imagine, the Brahmanas these Brahmanas so well versed in the Vedas, and having direct association with the Vedas, but still not knowing the purpose. And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but they understand, and they come to the realization of, oh, right, this is why we're doing everything. And they realized those sinful activities, and they regretted it, and they could see that their wives were elevated to the platform of pure devotional service. And what's interesting is that also, according to the Vedic injunctions, basically women usually didn't undergo the purificatory process of getting initiated with a sacred thread or Brahmin initiation, and they're not allowed to live as brahmacharinis in the ashram of the spiritual master, or advised to undergo the strict disciplinary procedure. They basically didn't have to follow all these strict procedures, and yet these wives of the Brahmanas became pure devotees and lovers of Krishna. Like, aside from all of these rules and regulations outside of that, and that's the point. That's the point, is that, we have the rules and regulations, and they're necessary like anything. These examples given all the time is like, you have to perform the scales when you're practicing the piano or any kind of musical instrument. You have to perform, this progressive process of learning how, so that at some point you can become spontaneous in playing. And it's the same thing with devotional service. Is we need the rules and regulations to understand the perimeters so that we stay focused on the goal and on the path, because it's too easy to get diverted and wind off and spiral off into all these different pathways. It's so easy to get distracted from the focus. And so the rules and regulations are to help us to do that, and to help us overcome the three modes and the mind, because otherwise, like the puppet, we'll get played by all the three modes and all the emotions and all the roller coasters. But if we follow the rules and regulations and the prescribed duties that we've been given, which are very simple in this age of Kali, no meat eating, no illicit sex, no gambling, and no intoxication. So, and then chanting of the Maha Mantra. So, they get to this place where they realize, and if you see, and this is so true of us too in our devotional lives, because they accepted the wives back, they realized the sin of their activities, but even at the end still, they wanted to go pay their obeisances to Krishna, but they didn't and could not go because they were afraid of Kamsa. Right? The wives of the Brahmanas were like, "Phew, it's all gone. No, Krishna, got it. Feline, let's go. Just do it. Let's go. I want this love. I've been wanting this love of Krishna for so long." But the Brahmanas, still kind of entrenched in their, ritualistic behavior, couldn't go because they were afraid of Kamsa. Because that shows, at least for me, that, that we come up in our devotional life, we'll come up with these different challenges where we might not take that step in faith. The difference is, of course, is that Krishna's got our back, the spiritual master has our back, and we will make progress if we keep trying. But again, the husbands, the Brahmanas, weren't envious when they realized the purpose of all of this, and we can see that too in the verse. Again, that the demigods were not envious, because they realized, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate goal of everything in this life. That's just, again, like one of the key points of understanding that envy is one of those things that you really have to work on. And so it's a matter of being introspective and hearing the dialogue that's going on in your head. And when your head starts to go into that dialogue, and you can really, and the thing about Krishna consciousness is it will show that to you. It will reveal that dialogue is not going to be beneficial for you. And it'll show you the dialogue, and then you have to be introspective enough to say, okay, I have to take responsibility for this dialogue, and I have to try to make that shift. And my spiritual master has said many, many times is that if you're in a position where you're having some animosity or you're having some type of envy towards somebody, the best solution is to serve them, and because that requires a lot of humility. To be able to serve somebody that you may have some envy towards, and soften the heart and realize that everybody's connected to Krishna, right? And so the other thing I was thinking about too, in light of this, in light of the gopis, not to be blamed, is like the mood of the gopis. And in the first sentence of the purport, the servants of Prabhupada share that this verse indicates that the transcendental sound of the flute of Krishna extended to all corners of the universe. And what this reminded me of is that this is like if you can just imagine, to me what came to mind was that this Krishna consciousness movement, ISKCON, Prabhupada's family, Prabhupada's ISKCON, is like the flute of Krishna. and it's beckoning everybody towards the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so the Sankirtan Yagya of Kali Yuga, of chanting the holy names of the Lord, is so important, because this holy name is non-different. The holy names of Krishna are non-different than Krishna himself. They're non-different than his flute and his attractiveness too. And so this is what, we have the opportunity, because and then I was thinking, this is the mood, of the gopis, especially Radharani, is that the gopis, and especially Radharani, wants everybody to have this loving relationship with Krishna. She wants all the gopis to have this relationship. They're always trying to make arrangements for her, but she's always trying to make arrangements for them. And so then you tie that to the fact that Lord Chaitanya came to give the holy name of the Lord, and he is in the mood of Radharani. And so Lord Chaitanya is out there saying, delivering the storehouse, the love of God through the chanting of the holy name of the Lord, and beckoning everybody to this loving relationship with Krishna. So for me, I'm a very visual person, and I can just imagine, Krishna playing his flute and it just spreading all over the universe and just attracting all the living entities. And that's part of what, when we experience this, love of Godhead in whatever minor amounts, at least speaking for myself, that we have, that when we share that, that it's like sharing the flute song of Krishna and sharing that love of Krishna, and that's what Lord Chaitanya came, and that's what, in the mood of Radharani, that the gopis want, and that we all can have in the context of thinking about, if you can think about them being in that position, like helpless when the flute gets played, and saying, what fault is ours? I mean, what is our fault? I mean, we're just these, how do they put it? Intermediate position, human beings in an intermediate position that are most unfortunate, and they're in that mood because of their humility, because they're the topmost devotees of Krishna. But then that also, for me, echoed, at least for me also personally, of thinking of ourselves, of being human beings in that intermediate position, because, and the struggle that we have, because in taking up Krishna consciousness, we're not exactly pure devotees, but we're also not materialist. We're kind of in this intermediate position of not being fully situated in Krishna. And obviously the gopis are fully situated in Krishna consciousness. We know that, but, due to their humility, they're sharing this. But again, it echoes, and that's the whole purport of the Bhagavatam and any of the Vedic literatures, is to show us the path. They're like maps, giving direction of how we can have, and how we should have, and what our mood should be, and our relationship should be in developing our love for Krishna, right? Of being willing to do anything, just like the wives of the Brahmanas, like the gopis were willing to do. They're willing to go to hell, because Krishna had a headache. They were willing to take the dust of his lotus feet because they didn't want him to suffer, and they loved him so much. And so that's what we're looking for, is we're looking for that love, and we need that love so much, because how else are we going to be satisfied? And then when we get touched by that love, and I'm sure you all have been touched by that love in one way or another, Krishna has reciprocated, or you wouldn't be here. And then when we feel that, we feel overwhelmed with that love, then we have that overwhelming love to want to share that love with others so that they can get that love and feel, this loss of conflict. I mean, you see it like now, right now, with all the political situation in the United States, this divisiveness, of left, right. And I was thinking about the, too, of the reason for loving Krishna is he's the ultimate equalizer. I mean, if you think about it, if everybody was to understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's God, he's real God, he has a real name, he has real activities, a real place, real devotees, then and everybody was attracted to that, he's like the great equalizer. You would understand that everybody's part and parcel of him, and you wouldn't have, these designations, and you wouldn't have, these enmities and this animosity and this divisiveness and this hate and all these other things. He's like the equalizer for everything, right? When somebody comes to understand that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it equalizes everything. And it's just, I don't know, it's just, to me, it's so amazing. And, to be able to get to that place where we can be really pulled by Krishna's flute and his pastimes, and, again, sharing that with everybody so that we can get rid of all this animosity and give shelter to everybody and help them understand, that I've struggled with this. I understand that there's conflict. I understand that there's even conflict within me now, that I'm not a pure devotee, but you could have this amazing love that could mitigate that and could satisfy your heart. And it's so important. So, yes, Krista. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, and it's an incumbent upon us to, to purify ourselves and to keep going that, because the more, purity is the force. And so the more pure we are, the more seriously we take this, the more internal work that we do, the more we strive to become Krishna consciousness and not let the mind override our decisions, and the more pure that we become, the more loud that sound of Krishna's flute, of his, through the Sankirtan movement will become. But it is, you're right, it's very important to be purified and to elevate, to continue. And we do the best we can, you're right. It's really important to, because it's a simultaneous thing where you really have to push yourself, but you don't beat yourself up, because you can get so tied up in beating yourself up that you just don't do anything. And that's like so non-functional. Yeah, I mean, and it's just like sitting in front of a piano and expecting to play, a Mozart concerto, or, one of these things that, it just takes time to do. And some learn faster than others, but that doesn't mean that somebody's better than other. We're all equally part and parcels of Krishna, and the grass in the spiritual world is just as, valuable and elevated and personal with Krishna as, the gopis. So all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, all glories to the Association of the Devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Radha Golokananda. I know, right?
Absolutely. That's how it, yes. That's how it